Okay, so you're clearly someone who's serious about setting goals the right way. And you've sent over a ton of interesting stuff on everything from vision boards to daily reviews. I'm excited to dig in.
What's fascinating is seeing how much your materials focus on not just what to do. The psychology behind it, it's like you intuitively get that sustainable change requires understanding the why.
Which is why I'm so glad you're here to help me unpack it all. Right off the bat, I noticed a lot of your sources talk about getting creative with goal setting. Like ditch the boring old to-do list and try things like uh, vision boards. I've
hmm
always been a bit skeptical of those, to be honest.
I get it, they can seem a little woo-woo, but the research backs up their effectiveness. It's about tapping into the power of visualization. Think about it. Our brains are constantly bombarded with information, but images. They cut through the noise and create a strong emotional connection.
So it's not just about pasting a picture of a beach on a board and hoping for a vacation.
Not quite. It's about choosing images that resonate with the feeling you want to achieve. Say your goal is to run a marathon. Instead of just a finish line photo, maybe you find images that represent the dedication, the early mornings, the feeling of accomplishment.
So it's like creating a visual representation of the journey, not just the destination.
Exactly. And some of your sources take this a step further with storytelling. They suggest writing a story about yourself achieving the goal, really immersing yourself in that future success.
That's interesting. Almost like giving your brain a preview of the reward waiting for it.
Precisely. And that brings us to another crucial element of effective goal setting that you clearly prioritize. Prioritization. You've got materials on everything from the Eisenhower matrix to more obscure frameworks I'd never even heard of.
Well, I am known for occasionally disappearing down a research rabbit hole. But yeah, even with the coolest goal-setting methods, it's useless if you're spread too thin, right? The Eisenhower matrix seems like a good place to start, though. It's something I've always found helpful for like work projects. But I'm curious how it applies to personal goals.
It's surprisingly versatile.
Yeah.
And it directly addresses that overwhelmed feeling we get when we have too many goals vying for our attention. Remember, it's about categorizing tasks based on urgency and importance.
Okay, so a quick refresher for our listeners. Urgent and important go in one quadrant, important but not urgent in another, and so on. But how do you actually decide where each goal fits in?
That's where your own insights from the materials you provided come in. For instance, you highlighted this one study that talked about the importance of aligning your goals with your core values. So ask yourself which of your goals truly resonate with who you are at your core. Those are your important ones.
So it's not just about getting things done, it's about making sure those things actually matter to you in the grand scheme of things. I like that. But even with a prioritized list, staying motivated can be a struggle. And man, did you send over some fascinating research on that.
Motivation is key, but it can be fickle. What's interesting is that several of your sources emphasize the importance of regularly reconnecting with your why.
Oh, I love that. It's like when people say they want to climb Mount Everest. Cool, but why? Is it for the challenge, the bragging rights, or a deep connection to nature? That why fuels you when things get tough?
Exactly. And you even had an article about how writing down your why and placing it somewhere visible can make a difference. Something about externalizing the motivation.
It's like a visual reminder to keep you going. Okay, I'm already seeing how these pieces connect. But let's talk about those moments when motivation alone isn't enough. When we need to break down a massive goal into manageable steps. And wow, you weren't kidding about those obscure frameworks. There's one here called the Pomodoro technique that's blowing my mind.
That one's more about time management, which is certainly connected. But in terms of breaking down goals, you'd highlighted the goal pyramid concept, right? That's a great one for visual learners.
Yeah, that one really clicked for me. Okay, so tell me more about this goal pyramid.
It visualizes your goals like a pyramid with your big, audacious goal at the top. On the levels below, you break that down into smaller milestones, then sub-goals. And finally, at the base, you have your daily tasks.
It's like that saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Yeah.
Suddenly, this huge goal feels way less intimidating because you're focused on those smaller, achievable steps.
Exactly. And speaking of achievable, your research on SMART goals really resonated with me. It emphasizes that goals shouldn't just be big and exciting. They need to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
So instead of saying, I want to be a better writer, it'd be more like, I want to write one short story per month and submit it to a literary magazine by the end of the year.
Precisely. That way you have a clear target, a way to track your progress, and a deadline to work towards.
It removes the ambiguity and gives you a roadmap for success. Okay, so we visualized our goals, prioritized them, broken them down into bite-sized pieces, and made sure they're actually achievable. But even with all that in place, Life happens, and that brings us to the critical role of regular reviews and adjustments.
Absolutely. It's interesting you'd highlighted a quote in your research. The plan is nothing. Planning is everything. It speaks to the importance of not just setting a course, but continually evaluating and adapting along the way.
It's like when you're navigating with a map. You might encounter an unexpected detour or discover a shortcut you didn't know about. You're still aiming for your destination. You're just adjusting your route as needed.
What stood out in your materials was the emphasis on finding a review frequency that works for you. Daily, weekly, monthly. There's no right or wrong answer. It's about what keeps you both accountable and engaged in the process.
So instead of forcing yourself into a rigid schedule, you're tuning into what your brain naturally responds to. For some, that might be a quick daily check-in, while others thrive on a more in-depth monthly reflection.
Exactly. And speaking of different approaches, you had some thought-provoking articles on morning versus evening reviews. Is there an ideal time to connect with your goals?
Okay, I'll admit this is something I've gone back and forth on. What's your take? Is one objectively better?
What's fascinating is that both sides present compelling arguments. Morning reviews are great for setting a positive tone for the day and aligning your actions with your intentions. It's like you're priming your mind for success from the get-go.
Starting your day with intention. I can see how that would be powerful. But then evening reviews offer that chance to reflect on your accomplishments. Identify any roadblocks and plan for tomorrow.
Exactly. It's about finding what resonates with your natural rhythms. Do you thrive on that early morning clarity, or do you prefer the closure of an evening reflection?
Or maybe, like you said, it's a bit of both. A quick check-in in the morning, a more detailed review in the evening. It's about creating a system that works for you, not against you. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from getting creative with goal setting to breaking things down and staying motivated. But let's be honest, even with the best intentions, we all face obstacles. And from what I can tell our listener, the learner is all about being prepared for those bumps in the road.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that you included materials on not just the how-to of goal setting, but also the how-to deal when things inevitably get tough.
Because let's be real, sometimes the biggest growth happens outside of our comfort zones, right?
Absolutely. And sometimes that growth comes from reframing what we perceive as obstacles. You had this fantastic article on the power of viewing setbacks not as failures, but as learning opportunities.
Okay, I love that. Because it's so easy to get discouraged when things don't go according to plan.
Exactly. But when we approach those moments with curiosity instead of self-criticism, it can completely shift our perspective. It's about asking, what can I learn from this experience that will help me move forward even stronger?
Instead of beating yourself up, you're essentially mining for gold in the rubble of a setback.
What's more, your research pointed to practical strategies for dealing with common obstacles like procrastination. One technique that stood out was the 2-minute rule.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember reading about that. Okay, so for our listeners who haven't, what is this magical 2-minute rule and how does it slay the procrastination monster? Essentially, if a task takes less than 2 minutes, you do it right away instead of adding it to your to-do list. It's about building momentum and overcoming that initial resistance.
That's a great summary, and your materials even offered some interesting twists on that. For example, there's the idea of using the 2-minute rule not just for tiny tasks, but as a way to trick yourself into starting bigger ones.
Okay, that I've got to hear more about. How does that work?
Okay. So let's say you're dreading writing a big report. Instead of focusing on the enormity of the task, tell yourself you'll just work on the outline for 2 minutes. Often that's all it takes to get over that initial hump.
Because once you're in the flow, it's much easier to keep going.
I can see how that would be a game changer. But I imagine there are times when even the best strategies aren't enough. Like, what happens when we set unrealistic goals in the first place? I feel like that's a recipe for disappointment and burnout.
It's a valid concern and one that you clearly anticipated.
Yeah.
Because you included some really insightful pieces on setting realistic yet ambitious goals. One recurring theme was the importance of recognizing limiting beliefs.
Those sneaky little voices in our heads that whisper, you're not good enough, or you'll never be able to do that. Exactly. And often those beliefs are based on past experiences or societal conditioning, not our actual potential. So part of the goal-setting process is challenging those limiting beliefs and replacing them with empowering ones.
It's about rewriting the narrative we tell ourselves. So instead of shrinking back from a challenge because we're afraid of failing, we embrace the possibility of growth and learning, regardless of the outcome.
Precisely. And your materials even touched on the role of self-compassion in all of this. It's not about being perfect. It's about being kind to ourselves throughout the process, celebrating the wins and learning from the setbacks.
Because ultimately, isn't that what makes goal setting sustainable in the long run? It's about creating a system that supports our well-being, not one that leaves us feeling defeated.
I couldn't agree more. And that brings us to a final thought-provoking question from your research. How can goal setting become less about achieving a specific outcome and more about embracing a journey of continuous growth?
That's a powerful question, and one that I think speaks to the heart of what it means to be the learner, constantly seeking new knowledge, skills, and experiences. It's not just about checking things off a list. It's about using goals as stepping stones on a path of lifelong learning and self-discovery.
Beautifully said. And as your research so eloquently demonstrated, there are countless paths to choose from, each offering its own unique set of challenges and rewards. The key is to find what resonates with you, to experiment, to adapt, and to never stop exploring.
I love that. So as we wrap up this incredibly insightful deep dive, a huge thank you to you for sharing your expertise and helping us unpack all these incredible strategies. And to our listener, the learner, thank you for providing such a fascinating collection of resources. We're always eager to hear your takeaways, so feel free to share your thoughts with us. And if you're hungry for more deep dives into fascinating topics, be sure to subscribe to the show. Until next time, happy goal crushing.